We're going to be calling on our main speaker to have his presentation. But before we let him come up, let's just cast our minds down to memory lane. There's this platform on TV that most PR practitioners are leveraging to actually publicize or communicate about their brands. Morning shows. And some of us don't even know how it came about. You just know there's morning show, and anytime you want to communicate, you always want to just go on to the morning show because you believe it's a peak time. Well, this gentleman who'll be coming up was part of the people who decided that Ghana needs to have a morning show, and today you and I are leveraging that to actually amplify the efforts of brands that we represent. This main speaker is a seasoned diplomat and media executive, having served as Ghana's ambassador to China, former director of the State Interest and Governance Authority in Ghana, previously head of CNN in Africa, and founder of Global Media Alliance. His extensive experience in both public service and media has given him a unique perspective on the importance of innovative leadership and strategic vision in driving institutional and continental progress. Join me with a round of applause as we welcome His Excellency Edward Boateng as he speaks on shaping the African narrative.
Good morning. And thank you very much, Eunice, for the nice introduction. I'd like to start on existing protocols. I think the Honorable Deputy Minister and has already recognized all the VIPs and the people in the room, so I'd like to stand on them. My topic is basically shaping the African narrative for the future. And I think yesterday I called Emma and I said, what is the African narrative? Because when I started off in communications several years ago, the African narrative was always very negative. And when we talked about the African narrative, it was negative. I mean, we talked about diseases, farming, and personally, one of the reasons why I even went into communication was because as a young student in the US at the time, I just found it quite interesting and sometimes annoying that when people saw you as an African in the US at that time on campuses, they felt pity for you. And I used to say, but my background is better than probably 80% of the people on this campus. Why is that they feel sorry for you? That was the African narrative. That's how people saw us. And in a lot of ways, that's how we saw ourselves. We're just pitiful. But I think the narrative today is different. And that's what I want us to focus on. It's different because everything happening around us, in my view, is different. But we still behave in a very pitiful way. Look at our leaders. I've always asked myself, we're having a Russian summit, 54 African leaders troop there to meet one leader. We're having the Koreans troop there. We're having this, we all go there. Why can't we have the Ghana summit and they should come here? It's the same pitiful mindset. I believe that, I'm exiting, I'm retired now, so for those of you in this room, should use your power of communications to change that pitiful mindset. Because our lot today is not that bad. If you look at all the indices around us, who is doing what and the African brands, it's not that bad. But we still have that, we still are steeped in that mindset. The CEO of Global Media Alliance was telling me that he's just lost 3 employees, all going to the UK, Canada to work. Because it's just still that pitiful mindset. Because today, if you're a young person and you decide that you are going to the UK, or you are going to Canada, or you are going to the US, short of going to school or going to join family, if you are going to look for opportunities, opportunities are here. And every single day, if you look at the World Bank indices, IMF, the place to go now is either Africa or Southeast Asia. So you sit on airplanes and them coming, but we are leaving. So what can we do to change it? And for me, that's how I ended up in media. I was working in Coca-Cola at that time in brand management, and my biggest dream at that time was to come to Ghana and set up a bottling factory. But I hated this pitiful mindset. So when I was introduced to Ted Turner, who was the founder of CNN in those days, and CNN was in the forefront of communications globally, because Ted Turner himself, because of his background, had a very strong edge that he wanted to change the world through communication. He believed that we could use communication as a leveling field. That if there was real-time communication, then people can make their own decisions. And that was his belief. And that's how he ended up putting all his money at that time to start CNN, which was called when I joined, it was called the Chicken Noodle Network, because nobody took us serious that we could use communications to change the world. It's called Cable News Network, but in the US, it was called Chicken Noodle Network. Who wants to work for CNN? And I had just been given an offer to work with. I was working at Coca-Cola, but they were sending me to, I think in those days, Nigeria and the UK. And then I had also had a very good offer from Chase Manhattan Bank. It's collapsed now. But at that time, it was the bank to work for, Then I met Ted Turner, and he said, I listened to everything you had to say, young man, but you cannot change the world selling bottled cola water. And somebody who was coming from Coca-Cola, which then was the world's #1 company. It is #1. If you're a young man, you had a Coca-Cola business card, you went to the nightclub, easy to get the girl of your dreams. And then the one said, bottled cola water. I said, what? He said, yeah, but that's what you guys are doing. You are selling bottled cola water. You can never change anybody's mind. Your continent, nobody. But if you come and work with us and you use communications, and it just sort of sparked something in my head. That's how I joined CNN. They were going to use communication, media to change the world. So for me, my job at that time was to help change the African narrative using communication. Those who were our guys who were going to Asia was use communications to change the African narrative. Let the world respect you. But he also had his other plans. For Americans also, he said, let the world think American. So he gave each of us our own task. The world was to think American. And if people thought about the US, they should think about baseball, basketball, McDonald's, and whatever America had to offer. And we were also to use it to change how the world, and that's how CNN became very popular. So we all went there, we're all as young as you, but each of us had our own, KPIs and objectives. And that's how I ended up. And at that time, it was difficult. That's why Eunice was talking about starting the breakfast show, that we're going to use media as a developmental tool. And I must say that we're very successful in a lot of countries. But that was then, and now we are where we are. So I'll take you through my presentation quickly, and then we can have a discussion in terms of what you all can do now to help shape. And the narrative you are shaping, when we say the African narrative, it's first you have to shape your own narrative. How do people see you? Your family narrative, your community narrative, and the country at large, and Africa. Because Africa itself, we always talk as if it's just one big thing. But, the narrative is when we talk about deputy ministers community, what do you think about it? It's his responsibility that one day people will say, this is where I want to go and live. You know, this is a community that people want to put projects in. And that's how I think we should start the conversation. So I will talk about, I think the then I've spoken about it, the negativity and the now, and how do we make global headlines? How do we make Ghana the brand that people want to associate with, that young people from US or UK or China, that when they think about, I want to live outside my country, Ghana is the brand that becomes top of mind. I think there's been a lot of success stories, which I talked about. And then we'll talk about the challenges and the opportunities and the role that all of you in this room can play in your own small corner. Next slide. So I've talked about the Africa, where this was the story, the picture of Africa in the 80s and 90s. Wherever you are in the world, you saw this boy like that. There was one which I didn't want to use, which was a young Somalian boy with flies all over the face. And that was the world portrayed for us. We talked about diseases and there were conflicts. When we talk about Ukraine, Russia today, it's no different from the Cote d'Ivoire war, no different from the Sierra Leonean war. But then even when our leaders talk about Russia, Ukraine, they make it look like something that is so bad and affecting all of us. But Cote d'Ivoire affected us more. But we don't put it in that perspective. So this was Africa in those days. And it's your responsibility to change that narrative in any way that you can. Next slide. Now, the Africa today that we don't talk about is some of the examples that I've put out there. Rwanda. I was in Rwanda in 1994 when the war started. And I've always said Kigali was like Suhum. For those of you who know Suhum, it's not negative, it's a small little town, very dusty. And the reason why I compare Kigali to Suhum was when I came from South Africa on my way to Kumasi, our car broke down in Suhum. So I was walking around the market. I said, Kigali, Papa. But 30 years later, Kigali is the city that everybody talks about, whether you're in New York or you're in Beijing or whether in Accra, everybody is talking about Kigali. So what has Kigali done right? It's something that we in Accra can also look at. So how did my Kigali or Suhum move so far away to become the Kigali that people, when they think about, they now talk about maybe comparing Kigali to San Francisco. They don't even compare Kigali anymore to Johannesburg. You have to go there and see. So how can we also make our community come and see? Somebody has done it, we can also do it. You talk about mobile banking in Kenya. M-Pesa was one of the first in the world. First in the world in terms of mobile phone banking. It's been very, very successful. You talk about democracy and politics. Because we live in Ghana, we take it for granted. But I think 10 years ago, I went to work on the Nigerian elections. And Nigeria had never had a shift from one party to the other. Just being PDP in power at that time. And as the elections results were coming in, we were working with the PDP at that time. We realized that PDP was losing the elections. That was the transition from Jonathan Goodluck to President Buhari. So you had all these big short men who had never lost power. They were very, they've always had power and money. And for the first time, they realized that their power was slipping. And for me, that evening, what really struck me was one of the young ladies, I think Fumi or somebody, I think it was Fumi, working with my partner, Ben. I said, what are we going to do? We'll give it to them. Fumi just looked at all of them. And she was about 23, 24. She got up and she said, what is wrong with losing power? What is wrong with losing power? Ghanaians always change governments. This government goes, this government comes. Now, Mr. Boateng, am I lying? I said, you are right. He said, then please go out and tell them that we've lost the election. That was what changed Nigeria's election. So we in Ghana take it for granted. And I've always remembered that story. So years later, I met her about 5 years ago. I said, Fumi, how come that day? He said, because they were annoying me. Like if we lose the election, that's the end of the world. But Mr. Boateng, look at me. And she had gone on from being a political aide. Now she's working in a bank. He said, the way they were talking, I just... So Ghana became that role model, which we take for granted. And it's not only in Ghana. I remember when January 6th happened in the US in 2020 when 2021 January, when Trump was fighting. I was watching one of these channels and they made reference to Ghana, that even in Ghana they have smooth transitions. So these are things that in the 80s and 90s you would not see. You know, Nigeria, Nollywood today is the second biggest movie making machine in the world. You know, they make more movies than Hollywood. India is number one. Nigeria is number two. Not in terms of revenue, but in terms of actual number of movies made. But I saw how Nollywood started in the 90s because I was part of it. Taking, what's it called? Containers from Apapa port. And I've always said that's the one thing that, for those of you who are older in the room, General Abacha did for Nigeria. He was one of the, or he's alleged to be one of the most notorious leaders Nigeria has ever had. But for us in those days to show CNN and our cartoons, he said, for every naira that we spent, you have to spend 20 kobo on us. So the 20 kobo meant that we had to invest in the Nigerian film industry. So it wasn't only us, but we were one of the pioneers. CNN, then later BBC. And today, look at what it has become. Major, major, major. I think it's over $3 to $4 billion in revenue. No foreign direct investment. If you take out the 10,000 and the 100,000 that we put in those days, every single money that the Nigerian film industry is making today is internally generated. It's internally generated. And it's gone on from movies to their music. Today, Nigerian music is all over the world. It's Nigerian money. It's Nigerian expertise. Yet, we don't talk about these stories. They don't make headlines. Why? Then we have Ivory Coast. This is a country that was on the brink of being destroyed just 20 years ago. And today, in terms of coffee and cocoa, they are the worst number one. But more than that, if you go to Côte d'Ivoire today, a lot is happening. You know, a lot is happening. So, these are the positive stories. If you look at the world's fastest growing economies, 2019, 2020, out of the top 5, you have 3 African countries. I don't know how many of you here are aware of that. Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Ivory Coast. The only 2 countries that are above us, or are within the 5, are not Western European countries. Bangladesh and India. So me, if I'm 20-something years old today, and I want to look for opportunities, these are the countries to look at. not the US, not the UK, because when you go there, you get stuck. Unless you have something which is very, very compelling. You have a skill which is very, very compelling. But if you are going there just like any of us, know that you get stuck and you get very, very frustrated. But these are the places to go. These are the places to look at. Now, the question is, we have the positive stories, but why are we not making the headlines? And I think it's your responsibility. I think Minister talked about it, using PR. Our job as PR practitioners is to make sure that our brands, our stories, our ideas make the global headlines. There's this young Ghanaian guy trained in China, surprisingly of all countries, who is putting Ghana on the map. Goes to places that you and I may not go to bring our stories to the fore. He started doing it when we were in China. Because like me at those days, he was very tired of Chinese looking down on Ghanaians. So he decided to have his own voice. And today, I think he's followed by millions and millions of people. So why can't that be you? We've had a global icon like Steve Wonder change his citizenship to become Ghanaian. It's major. I don't know how many Ghanaians even know this story. Then you have South Africa. Just trying to give you a few examples. So our narrative, as I told Emma today, is not negative. So why should we say the African narrative? Because whenever we say the African narrative, what comes into is that the pitiful picture that we had in the 80s and 90s. So we in this room, or you in this room, for me, I'm retired, are the future of telling African stories. How can you make sure that these stories make the global headlines? These stories are what people are talking about, so that it gives the next generation of African the confidence, the next generation of Ghanaians the confidence. In the last 10 years, 20 years, some of the most successful brands globally, this is not Africa alone, globally, are some of the brands we've shown. I should have put Madame's brand there, Just One. That's another successful brand. You know, it's from selling T-shirts to today one of the most recognizable African brands. So all these companies are less than 20 years old, most of them, probably with the exception of ShopRite. So we have good stories and we have good products. Now the challenge is, how will those of you in this room do what we did with, let's say, CNN? Because when I joined CNN, it was called Chicken Noodle Network. But we're determined and we became number one. So how can we make Ethiopian Airways number one? How can we make Dangote brands number one? Because as they go up, create wealth and we all make money. And they can pay us well. So the people who started this company have done what they can. I think those of you in this room need to also challenge yourself, even within the Ghanaian context. How do you take what we have now to make it number one? You know, our food, our clothing, our culture, you know, whatever makes us Ghanaian, how can we put it on the world stage? The opportunity is that technology today makes that much, much easier. During my time, it wasn't. Sometimes you have to go and sit in the library, rapping through books. But today you have AI, You have all the social media tools. How can you use it to make sure that you are number one? You know. Now, today, these are the stories of Africa. It's gone from disease, poverty, conflict. They talk about death trap diplomacy, neocolonialism, human rights, environmental concerns, transparency, economic imbalance. The truth is that all these problems, they are in every country. Every single country in the world. I've lived in the US. I've lived in Europe. It's Africa. They can't have a problem. But the world's most indebted country is the US. But we've made like debt in this country a problem. And that's one of the problems I have with bankers in this country. So that they make it difficult for even businesses to grow. Whereas in the US and other places, the more you are in debt, the more they give you money. Only here they will close your business. So it's your responsibility that in this new world in which we are, we have to use our tools of communication to change it. You know, we talk about Chinese people coming into our market, US people. The truth of the matter is there's no country that has developed without maybe getting technology from outside. I mean, I talk about Nollywood developing. We had the talent, but we still had to import the cameras from the US. We had to import the editing equipment. So there's nothing wrong with us as Africans taking what is outside there to also make our lives better. It's how we do it that is we need to talk about. Then the issue of human rights. We should define our own human rights. But it looks like we're always asking the West to define for us our human rights. We have our own systems which work for us. Chieftaincy, and you know, we run two systems in this country. You have our traditional systems, and then you have the government. And they work side by side. But then somebody comes and they go to Volta region or they go to Ashanti region and say, oh, they're abusing the kids. And I say, but how do you define abuse here? Because you want to see somebody on the farm with their grandparents' cocoa farm. So we need to tell our stories such that the world does not define for us who we should be. Then there are issues of environmental concerns, transparency, and the imbalance. These are challenges, but you also have to. We're not only communicating with the outside world. All these issues, if our government is borrowing money, it's our responsibility to make sure that they are using the money properly. What they can fine, but what they cannot say is not right. You understand? So we have to make sure. And we have to make sure that the things that will push our society forward, we take the government and the leaders to task. Technology and innovation make it easy that today we can do things in real time. So you can tell your stories in real time. You know, but the tools are there. You have to understand how to use those tools. The challenge with the field in which you find yourself is that if you are not one step ahead, the time will come when AI will replace all of you in this room. You know, because with AI, you tell them and they will do everything for you. So how do you make sure that you are one step ahead of AI or whatever technology will come? But it makes life easier. You know, it makes you also efficient, and it can make you very professional. I mean, like this young man I spoke about, It's only him and his camera, but he's all over the world. There are also opportunities, agriculture, opportunities in the creative arts and entertainment. Unfortunately, the CEO he done a fantastic job putting Ghana on the map in terms of our arts and tourism over the last 7 years. So how can people like you benefit and monetize that opportunity? How do you monetize it? It's important. I think Africa has, distinct when it comes to creativity and entertainment. Nakupon the chair. It's Nakupon the chair. So how do we benefit from it? It's something that all of you have to look at. Okay. Last slide. So finally, hey Minister, so you have to listen. Catch your parliament, so you are training the next generation. All right, thank you. So before I say that, I'm saying that the power of your narrative, however, whichever way you want to shape your narrative, is that you should have the power to inspire people. You know, just like Tetena inspired us. And when I came to Africa, I was quite young, early 30s. But we used the inspiration we got to also inspire. That's how I started Inside Africa, to talk about the African story, to talk about African music, talk about African clothes, culture. Because in the 80s, it was unheard of that you come and do a presentation like this and be wearing an African outfit. I'll be in suit and tie, like my brother. That was us. You know, because you had to dress like him to be respected, for people to think that you had knowledge. But today, you can go to any event anywhere in the world and wear an African outfit, and it's accepted as a formal wear. You know, because there were people who put themselves that we're going to do this. And sometimes I say, when we started these things, we didn't even know the end results, but it was our passion. We didn't know that this was going to be the end result. You know, so you also have the power to use your narrative to inspire. And never, never, never think that your narrative is not important enough. Never, never think like that, because what you think is not important today will be the life changer for some other people in years to come. You know, will be the life changer for some other people when. And most importantly, we need unity. Because if you are in a society where there's always conflict, nobody will bring their money. You know, nobody will bring their money. So as much as we will fight over our politics, we will fight over our differences, whatever you are doing at the end of the day should unite us as a people. We don't always have to agree, and we don't even have to like each other. But we have to recognize that this person can do the job, so let the person do it. Because at the end of the day, when the person has done it, all of us benefit. You know. Me, I created Silverbird Cinemas, my partner. They've never paid us one dividend. Once in a while, they'll give you some small pocket money. But we've paid people for the last 15 years. I know people have been able to look after their children, build houses. That's how the community works. You know, that's how the community works. So the more Aliko Dankotes, Just Funds we create, the more wealth that comes into the society eventually. Because at the end of the day, they are just one and their family. The beneficiaries are those of us who are working within the companies. And I think that is what the narrative should be. The narrative should be to spread our positive stories, make sure that we all go together. You know, no African child should be left behind. No Ghanaian child should be left behind. And no Ghanaian child during your lifetime should go to bed hungry. That should be a thing of the past. And it's your responsibility and my responsibility. Thank you. I want to end here.